Hi, everyone. My name is Jillian Cobb, and I'm the public programs producer here at the National Nordic Museum. And I am happy to welcome everyone to today's program, Excavating a Viking Ship, Findings from the Gjellestad Dig. So in the autumn of 2018, archaeologists discovered a Viking ship at Gjellestad near Halden, Norway. A new ship burial from the Viking Age had been found. A clear and precise outline in georadar images was the start of a project that will provide new insights into Viking ships in the Viking Age. In 2019, archaeologists started excavating the ship, and it had been over 115 years since the last time a similar excavation had taken place. We will have a Q&A at the end of today's talk, so when those questions pop in your head, feel free to put them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And I'm happy to turn things over to Joachim Carlson, Associate Professor at Oslo University College and Project Manager of the website gjellstadstory.no that gives viewers a comprehensive digital rendering of the site to help further introduce today's program and speakers. So I'll turn it over to you all.
Thank you, Gillian. It's a pleasure to introduce Sigrid and Christian, the archaeologists who will tell more about the findings from the Gjellestad dig. I've been so lucky to be able to follow their work from the Viking ship was discovered in 2018 until now. And I also, as Gillian said, contributed to the making of the digital exhibit gjellestadstory.com. And you can see that by following a link in the event invitation. Recently, I was a visiting scholar at the UW, and from that stay, I know that you are really interested in this. So I'm therefore so happy that this talk is happening. So then I give the word to, so we get going, to give the word to Sigrid.
Hello, and thank you. My name is Sigrid Mannsåker Gundersen, and I'm an archaeologist working with the Viken County Council. I have been working with and in the Gjellestad area since 2016, I think it's fair to say, since well before the discovery of the ship burial. And I'm still working with this. So I think it was very nice to be invited to talk here today. I'll start sharing my presentation. Then, does it look all right now? Yes. Okay, so here you see the Gjellestad field and its surrounding landscape. To the left, can you see my pointer when I use it? Right. Yeah. To the left is the big Gjellmound, and in the distance you can see the sea. Gjellestad is located in southeast Norway, close to the Swedish border. It is on the east side of the Oslofjord, which is here. As is the Tune ship burial. Tune is one of the 3 Viking ships on display in the Viking Ship Museum in Oslo. On the western side of the Oslofjord, right here, is Borre, Oseberg and Gokstad, which are the most famous of our Viking ships. So this is the region in Norway where most of our known ship burials are situated. Today, Gjellestad is lying in an agricultural landscape. It is very close to the main highway from Europe and Sweden. So if any of you want to come visit once, it's very easily accessible. The ship burial today is about 1.5 kilometers from the sea, and that might seem a bit odd, maybe. But in the Viking Age, in the early Viking Age, the sea level was different. Around 800 AD, the seawater went further inland, making a shallow bay close to Gjellestad. The shore was only about 500 meters away from the burial site. And in addition, a small river or stream is running by the site and into the sea, and it may have been usable for a ship back then. Also, it's easier to see how Gjellestad might have been a good place for living and a good place for powerful people. It's connected to the sea, which was the true highway in the Iron Age and the Viking Age, and at the same time, it's a bit withdrawn and protected. The background story for our knowledge of Gjellestad is very long and very full of details, and we cannot go into all of them now. But still, all the bits and pieces of information is the reason why we ended up finding the ship burial. So I'll mention the most important ones. This is an area with many Iron Age burial sites that can still be seen today. That alone tells us that there were many people and a lot of activity here in the Iron Age. Most visible of all is the Gjell mound that you can see here in the photo in the foreground. According to local legend, a king named Gjell was buried inside it, together with his ship. In the late 1960s, a small excavation took place in the Gjell mound. A trench was dug straight through it. Right in the lower right picture, you can see this is where it went. No ship was found, nor anything spectacular or obviously royal. A crude broken amber pearl was the only item found. But one could conclude that the mound was indeed a man-made burial mound, probably built between the 4th and 7th century, and by that older than the Viking Age. Also, the archaeologists believe that there was intrusion into the mound in the Viking Age. We have a theory that the local legend of King Gjell is in essence true, but that at some point in history it was referred to the wrong mound. I should maybe add that a while after this fieldwork, the Gjell mound was restored and reconstructed to the shape it has today. Historical records tell us that there once were many grave mounds on the Gjellestad field. 2 of them remarkably big, though not as big as the Gjell mound. They were removed in the 19th century to allow more efficient and modern agriculture. This happened all over Norway and is really sad. In one of the mounds at Gjellestad, the farmers are said to have found the remains of a boat. In another mound, a chamber with human bones. And all of this is gone today, but from this we knew that the field had preserved organic material as recently as the 19th century. Also, several metal objects have been found by metal detecting at Gjellestad. Metal detecting has become a popular hobby in Norway, and in Gjellestad it has provided us with material dating from the 4th century and all the way through the Iron Age and Viking Age and beyond. Here you can see some examples. Top left is a spinning wheel, then a piece of a brooch and a weight from the Viking Age. And to the right is a beautiful gold barlock dating to the 4th century. The metal found from the field matches the historical records of an Iron Age burial site here. Then we also had our own little fieldwork here in 2017. This was not research, but instigated by the wish to place a water pipeline across the field. In our trenches, we found traces of the ringed ditches typically surrounding a grave mound. We identified 4 such ringed ditches. One of them is marked at the photo to the left. So the ditch itself is the darker dirt here, and we marked it with a white line to make it more clear in the photo. We also found post holes from a building and traces of prehistoric plowing, as seen to the right. These are the lines that you can see pop from the underground. So in 2018, we received a note that the owner of Gjellestad wanted to renew the drainage system of the field. With all the information we already had, we knew we needed to investigate what else could be left in the field before considering to allow or not allow the new drainage. And we decided to go for ground penetrating radar this time, GPR. This is equipment we don't possess ourselves, so we hired Norwegian Institute of Cultural Heritage to do it for us. We hoped using GPR could give us a good picture of the entire field, not just the ordinary glimpses that we get through the traditional trenches made with an excavator. And of course, we were not disappointed. This is a picture of the structures about 30 centimeters below surface. So what caught the eye of everybody was, of course, the ship shape, surrounded by a dark circular shape, seen in the middle of the photo. It had been more than 100 years since last time a ship burial was excavated in Norway, and now suddenly we had a new one. So this video zooms back and forth through all the depths of the ship burial. You can see that it changes characters in the deepest parts, and a dark line can be seen. We realized this must be the keel of the ship and wondered if that could be in a better shape than the rest, as it stands out so clearly. I hope you can see it, this dark line in the middle of the ship. In the picture to the left, you can also see other circular shapes, big ones and smaller ones, and they represent the flattened grave mounds. They're not so easy to see, but detectable when all results are examined. That's the post holes that make up the prehistoric buildings. I will show them afterwards. So by 2018, we knew that we had a sensational ship burial, in addition to several other mines and settlement remains. But we did not know what state of preservation or decomposition the ship burial would be in. Neither did we know if the GPR had caught everything in the field, and we did not know what period these structures belonged to. So this led us to a joint project with the Museum of Cultural History, which Christian represents. And the aim of that project was to get a better grip on both the ship burial and the surrounding field. So the museum focused on the ship burial, and we in the county council did the rest. We opened up trenches that were very carefully planned. The trench above the ship burial is here in the middle of the photo. The rest was aimed to find post holes and other structures identified through GPR. So all of this are to find the houses and the other structures that we thought we could see on the GPR. And to the right, I just included a picture of a very happy archaeologist. This is the man, Lars, who drove the little cart with the GPR equipment. He was very happy to see it all in real life afterwards. Quite proud also, I think. So after a joint project in 2019, we could summarize. We had around 15 burial mounds, give or take a few, including the ship grave. We also had at least 5 houses, a fence, cooking pits, and other structures. The houses are shown as long blue shapes in the picture to the right. And the burial mounds are all marked with red. In our trenches, we had identified 106 different structures, which was at least 5 times as many as we had seen through the GPR with the same trenches. So we feel certain that if the field is ever properly excavated, the number of buildings will rise notably. We had radiocarbon datings spanning from the early Bronze Age to the Merovingian period. All the buildings were from the older Iron Age, and most of our samples came out as migration period, that is the 5th and 6th century AD. A bit surprising to us was that none of our samples dated to the Viking Age. For now, it looks like the farm itself was abandoned or moved a couple of centuries before the Viking Age even started. The burial site must still have been used though. And with that, I'll give the word to Christian.
Thank you, Sigrid, and hello, everyone. My name is Christian Rødsrud. I'm gonna just share my slide here, like that. Yeah, hope you can all see it now. The Museum of Cultural History that I represent, they took over the excavation of the ship after the surveying represented by Sigrid in 2019, and my role in this project was as a project manager, which I still am, for the excavation of the Gjellestad ship. And this excavation, they lasted quite long, longer than most excavations in Norway, as you can see, from 2020 to 21. And that's why I chose this picture, because we actually continued excavations into the winter, which is quite unusual. Therefore, we can see the snow, and we also have a tent covering the excavation surface. Now I'm going to turn the attention back to this animation that Sigrid showed us. There are 2 things you should look more closely at. There are 2 anomalies, one centrally here in the middle of the ship in white. And the first thing we'll take a look at is this long anomaly here, which is in fact a drainage ditch. And what we did back in 2019 was doing a trial excavation of the ship, we actually started emptying this drainage ditch to see how the preservative conditions for the ship were. And as you can see here, and unfortunate as it was, the drainage pipe had been dug all the way through the ship, right in the middle, which was not really great for preservative conditions, of course. So we removed the drainage pipes, and what we found underneath was this. So this was the main moment back in 2019 when we actually touched upon the very keel of the ship. As you can see, looking down on it here, it's there are no measure sticks here, but we could already back then see it's very small and slender as compared to, for example, Oseberg and Gjellestad ships, which are in the museums in Oslo. So what we did was actually to sample the keel. Dramatic as it might have looked back then, we sawed off a piece of it, which you can see to the left here. And that was really important, but because we were able to study the remaining wood in detail, and it was very soft and spongious, the first centimeter in, and all the original surface of the keel was missing. We could also see that there were soft rot bacteria and very aggressive attacks onto the wood, and the consequences you can see to the right here. The consequences of soft rot, the cell walls are slowly being consumed by the fungi, actually, and you see that in white here is the normal cell structure of wood, while the outer surface here is being eaten almost daily, I would say. So it was a very dramatic condition. We called for aid by the government back in 2019, and they decided we needed to fund this. It had to be excavated before it was too late. So then started the whole adventure of this first excavation of a Viking ship since 1904 in Norway, actually, which was the Oseberg. There you can see the two in comparison, just for fun, really. You see inside Oseberg at the bottom and the Gjellestad ship at the top. So the big question is, how much can we identify today? There is a real big difference, as you can see, while the Oseberg is so much more preserved. We had to rely on modern methodology and technology to find out all the details of the Gjellestad ship, because it once was all the same. But as you can see, much more deteriorated, so we have to do with samples and analysis. So the excavation started like this by removing all the topsoil from the field around the ship, and the shape, of course, appears very clearly to you in black contrast to the lighter soils around it. Here you can see the excavation at different levels. We're starting to remove soils within the ship here. And at all levels we took photogrammetry models, as you can see here, of different stages of removal. By actually every little layer we removed, we took a new photogrammetry model. I can't show you all of them, that would take all day. So we're going into the final phase here, moving towards the very bottom of the ship, removing all the soils that once was the big mound on top of it, because that mound we know was removed somewhere around 1880, as Sigrid mentioned. And lastly, at the end of the year, back in 2020, it looked like this. You can see all the soils had been removed, and we can see the hull of the ship as it was surviving in the ground. And all the dots, they are the rivets of the ship. So it was not as well preserved as the Oseberg. It couldn't be lifted and taken in and be an example of a Viking ship like the ones we have from before. But still, as you see on this picture, you can still appreciate the wood. You can see it, the cell structure. It had collapsed from being something like 2.5 centimeters thick to now being only 1 or 2 millimeters remaining. So it's more of an imprint than an actually ship itself. However, all the rivets were there. There are some parts of wood still remaining. This here is one of the frames of the ship. Only 2 or 3 of those had survived in fragments. But here we're moving on to the what I call the jewel of the crown. Really, it's the keel from the ship after removal. There is the proud bunch of archaeologists doing all the clever work for as long as 2 years. There are many details to be studied from this. Here is just a cross-section of the keel after it had been cut in the excavations back in 2019. But now we can appreciate a lot more from it. We see that it's very deteriorated, and the upper part had actually rotted away. But what we could see after excavations is that in fact it used to have a T-shaped keel. The upper part had been removed, and it must have looked almost the same as this. This is the cross section of the Oseberg ship, and here is the typical keel of that ship, T-shaped, and the planking or the strakes are attached to it like this, and it would have been just the same with the Gjellestad ship, of course. There are many other details to find as well. I mentioned the anomaly in the middle of the ship that we could see on the geophysical data, and this is actually what we're looking at here. This is a break-in or a disturbance into the ship. Now we're outside the ship itself. We're in a trench that starts to the west of the ship. There must have been still a mound when they dug this trench, and you can actually see this is the marking of the shovel. You can see it's a sterile soil out here with typical normal layering, but inside where the shoveling has been taking place, all the soil matrix is totally mixed around, and you can see it's all disturbed. And we can follow this from the western side of the ship with several shovel markings here, and then they hit the side of the ship, so they had to go up, and then they went into the ship. So unfortunately, but not necessarily surprisingly, this ship had been disturbed and plundered, and it's a thing we have seen before with both the Oseberg and the Gjellestad ships as well. They were also disturbed and plundered only a few years after its composition, we believe. Seemingly they are plundered somewhere around 950, and these 2 burials are from 900 and 830 more or less. So only 100 to 50, somewhere around 50 to 100 years after the burials itself, and supposedly the same thing took place here. And in this dotted blue line you can see here, this is the break-in, and you can see on the image here that all the rivets are in regular order outside this break-in, but in the middle it's all been tossed around and disturbed by the plunderers. Now what I'm showing you here is decomposed wood. It represents this part of the ship, the undisturbed part of the burial chamber. So this was a great finding for us. We could actually see how large the burial chamber had been, and that it was built up with timbers, much like the burial chambers of Oseberg and the Gjellestad as well. It's 2.5 meters wide and 4.5 meters long. So much like a student flat of today, I'd say. Other details. This finding was particularly important. It's a rivet, but it's a special one. You can see here it's a normal rivet closest to us, but then we have this long rivet with an anchor-shaped row. A typical rivet is 5 centimeters long, allowing 2 strakes of 2.5 centimeters to be clenched together. This one, however, is over 20 centimeters long and must have held together more substantial pieces of wood. So we're into the inner construction of the hull here. So if we look again back to the Oseberg ship model, we can see that this probably represents a long rivet that attaches one of the frames to the strakes of the ship. So here we are looking at the very inner construction. And we could go into more detail, once again looking at the Oseberg ship, and we can see the very same anchor-shaped row here. So this means that we now knew exactly where in the ship we were when we were digging, and this was the upper part of the ship that was still surviving. So we have something like 9 or 10 strakes preserved, while the upper planks, they are now gone, missing, plowed away. There were over 8,000 finds in the ship, and you can see some of them here. To the top left, you see a couple of beads. They are actually not from the ship itself, they are from the topsoil above it, and most likely plowed around from one of the other graves from the field. It could also be plowed out of the ship, but it doesn't really match up with any of the other finds we have. However, all the other finds you can see here are from the ship itself. In the middle piece on the top here, it's a fragment of iron, as were many of the objects we found in the ship. Most finds are as indiscernible like this one, and have to be worked with to really understand them. Then on the top right, there is something you can probably appreciate, although the object itself is in fact removed. You can see the imprint of an axe here, but it must be so that the axe was actually not there when we found it. We only found the imprint, so the grave robbers must actually have taken this axe with them and removed it from the ship. But luckily we could find the imprint. So lower left, these are probably the very deteriorated fittings from a chest, and it can be compared with the Oseberg chests in a more well-preserved manner in the corner there. Another very beautiful but small find was this piece of glass. It's from a Viking Age beaker, and it must have looked like one of the glasses to the right here. Then there were bones, and quite a few of them. Early on in the excavation, we're starting to hit bone, and as you can see, it's not even a small one. It's from a big animal, a mammal of some kind, and most probably would think it was a horse or cattle, as is normal within these ship burials. You can look more closely at it, and as the excavation is finished today, we have the osteology report telling us all the fragments we found, and if we start to the right here, this is the hip section of a horse, as it's now been determined. And I'm sorry, it's not in English for you here, but if we look at all the fragments, there are 25 bones of horses, 560 hooved animals, 10 bones from cattle, etc., etc., and even a halibut. And to the left, you can see there were also bones of humans, and this surprised us a bit. They were found scattered around the ship, many of them, and they were burnt, surprisingly, as though nothing seemed burnt within the burial chamber. And we've now looked more closely into it. They're all human bones, but they have been dated to the 3rd century AD. Meaning they are actually from a predecessing burial mound, and it seems that they must have used composition materials or building materials from other mounds at the site when constructing the mound on top of the Viking ship here. So a little bit of intermingling with the previous dead. We found also a fragment of a whetstone, which is quite interesting. It once again, it's broken, as almost everything was within the burial chamber, unfortunately. Just a fragment. It must have been a large whetstone when it was placed there. We don't know if it's just the fragment that was placed within the grave, or if it was destroyed by some of the disturbances, but I'd at least like to speculate where it's from. We know there is a famous place in Norway, Eidsborgendalen in Telemark. There was a huge export of whetstones from this area beginning in the 8th century, and we haven't done the physical analysis yet, so I can't do much more than speculate that it's actually from that very quarry. And then there was something that surprised us completely. We found something underneath the ship while trying to remove some of the rivets in the end of the season in 2021. And what could that be all the way down there? And well, what is it really? It's difficult to tell from the picture, but it seems to be an axe. We haven't excavated fully yet, so I cannot be too sure. But what was that doing there? I can't say, but that I have jumped to a conclusion yet. But I have several alternatives. It might be so that they, when placing the ship for the burial, they might have made a sacrifice or an offering just by placing an axe in there. Second theory would be that when the ship was placed within that trench that must have been dug before they placed it, maybe the axe could have been used to wedge the ship in place. Or thirdly, it could have been used by some of the robbers actually to chop through the wood looking for artifacts or remains of the dead that they needed for some unknown purposes. Or finally, it could be once again a sacrificial interpretation, but we know from many other graves that ritual violence was employed at these kinds of burials, and maybe it was just used to chop into the burial chamber and actually trying to destroy the boat in some way or destroy other artifacts. We can see a couple of examples here from other burials where this kind of ritual violence took place in the Viking Age. You can see shield bosses here being chopped into by axes and spears jammed into to the same shield bosses. So these are other examples, but it's still up for interpretation. So then, what was this ship? I was asked that question already before the excavation began. So you see to the top left there, this guy from ArcheoSoup, he asked me if this interpretation with a mast was correct. And well, I couldn't tell at the moment. It's one of the big questions that we're aiming to find out about. On the bottom right here, you can see the mast partner from the Gjellestad ship, and underneath it, the end of the keelson. That can be glimpsed underneath it. And these are substantial, large pieces of wood. And I would have expected to find some of those pieces while excavating the Gjellestad burial, but we found none of them. This doesn't mean that we actually can conclude that this ship was without sailing abilities. It has a narrow and slender keel, perhaps pointing to the same direction, that that's a ship mostly for rowing. But then again, we don't really know before we have a complete analysis. It could be so that they actually removed the mast and the rigging as well, because they were expensive and they needed them for another ship. And since this was going into burial, it made sense to remove them. And the sail would be actually even more expensive. Well, here is the keel again. So now I'm jumping to the dating of this ship. The keel as seen back in 2019, and the section we cut out, it has been analyzed by dendrochronologists. And the tree rings, they match the growth of a tree from 603 to 724. Now the average ring width of the annual rings, it's only 0.5 millimeter. So it's, and then we have to add a couple of years, coming to 732 as the earliest interpretation of when the tree was felled. Then again, there are no sapwood rings, no bark surface, and when you're chopping wood and shaping the keel, you would have removed something like 2 or 3 centimeters of tree rings. Then you could have actually removed as many as 100 years from the tree itself, which means we should possibly add up to 100 years to the dating. So when we started off, I said the felling or the conclusion must be that the tree felling was at the end of the 8th century and the beginning of the 10th century, and that we are somewhere in the first half of the Viking Age. We come a little bit closer than that now. I tend to say that we are with a burial from around 800, and then we are actually earlier than the Oseberg ship, for example, from 830. This again matches up with some of the very few remaining finds. The beads that we found within the burial chamber, they were left behind by the robbers. Either they hadn't seen them before because they were small, or it wasn't of importance to them. We found quite a few, 2 very large ones. This one here is to the top left, now the bottom left, it's a large amber bead. It's 4.5 centimeters in diameter. It's the largest one in the collection in Oslo. And the one on top of it, it's of the same size. Then we have some smaller beads, a small collection of them. There are white ones, there are the ones with gold foil and a small amber one. And when comparing to the bead chronology of the Viking period, it seems to match up to be from the period somewhere between 780 to 830 AD. So it can actually, this ship can actually be from before 800 possibly, but I'm not concluding yet. You have to work more with the finds. There's another thing to look at, that is the dendrochronological provenance. When studying these annual rings, you compare them to other known finds of oak, because it was built of oak, and the closest parallels are the Oseberg ship itself and one of the small boats from the Gjellestad ship. We know that both these ships were built in a little fjord in western Norway, and this indicates that also the Gjellestad ship does actually not come from the Oslo fjord. It might have been built in western Norway, or at least somewhere from the Trondheim area or down to Agder. We need to study more samples of wood, but we haven't come that far in the or in the afterwork yet. I want to show you what we're working at now, just by looking at this link. If I can get it working. There we go. We have several photogrammetry models of the ship, as I told you before. Here's just one to see how we can work with all these models. This is when all the soil was removed, and we can look into all the details from the ship, looking at details from rivets as you see them here, and the remaining wood as well. It's really great stuff to work with, also in the post-excavation period, and it could be used by researchers in the future to go back and reinterpret what we did actually, and good for museum collections as well, I think.
Excuse me, Christian. I think there have been a mix-up of screens, so
oops,
we couldn't see the last the 3D model.
Yeah, I'll just skip that one then. Can you see this one now?
Yes.
Yeah. So these are also photogrammetry models, and what we're doing now is kind of updating the method from how it's been done many recent years with excavations. We have the photogrammetry, and these red pins, as you can see here, they represents a measurement point for each and every rivet within the ship. But we wanna do this in much more greater detail. We want to be able to look at the photogrammetry model, and we wanted to get detail from every rivet. You can see some results to the right here, but I'm going to go to the next slide so you can see it in more detail. The difficult thing for us was that the rivets were in a poor state of preservation, very brittle, very not holding together very well, and you can see one to the left and a CT scan to the right, and it's gone all into pieces, as you can see. So we had to find a way to excavate them without destroying them, because if you hit them with a normal excavation trowel, they would fall apart like a potato crisp. So what we ended up doing was taking each and every rivet in within a soil block. So we created this instruments, as you can see here in Norwegian, naglekjeven. I'll just call it jaws for you. It's for extracting rivets inside blocks of soil, and so you just press it into the ground and grab out a piece of soil, as you can see here. This was all packed very tightly, brought back to the museum and CT scanned and X-rayed. And we also did it in great detail. Everything was measured with 4 measure points with a mini prism. And every CT scan is going to be put into a larger 3-dimensional model. And the conservation does not affect this at all. I hope you can see this now, because this is all about a virtual excavation of the objects. You can see the soil block here, and then by removing the layers, you can actually see the rivet itself appearing in great detail. So this is what we do with each and every one of them, 1,400 in total. And by extrapolating all the rivets from the ship and superimposing them onto the photogrammetry, or even joining the two sets of data into one 3D model, it allows for a much more detailed model for us to form the basis for a precise reconstruction. And as you can see to the right, we can zoom in on details for every nail and rivets, giving them different coloring according to function and type, measuring lengths, studying the angles of every piece of the puzzle in great detail. So this is what we're working at the moment. And I'll end my part of the slide with this, photo from the Oseberg and just comparing it to how an excavation looks today. Thank you. And then it's back to Sigrid, I think.
Yes, thank you. Let's see, share. I'll go back to where I ended. Let's see. Oh, yeah. So after Christian and his team ended the excavation, the ship imprint was covered with a cloth, and we filled it with sand and built this little mound. And after this picture was taken, we made sure it grows grass and flowers there. So it lies like a green little mound today, just awaiting us and everybody around us to decide what to happen with it next. Christian showed you the jaws, the instrument for removing rivets. What you didn't say was that the way you have excavated this ship, it is done to make sure that in theory it could be restored back to what it looked like before all the rivets were removed. So in the future, if it's possible, it might be displayed to the public as the ship imprint you saw in some of the photos. But this is a very demanding task because to display the ship burial, we must find a way to secure it from weather and climate and other factors that could damage it. So for inspiration, we have been looking to Ladby in Denmark. It's a ship burial on the island of Fyn. The site resembles Gjellestad in many ways. And this ship burial is now, after they've had quite a lot of trouble, but now it is displayed successfully. Based on their experience, we know that it is important to construct a building not only to cover the remains with the roof and walls, but it's also necessary to have a basement to gain control of humidity and temperature. So we had just to start with finding out if this is at all possible at Gjellestad. And as you see in the photo to the left in the bottom, we've had geotechnical surveys this winter. Our site is in an area where there could be quick clay, and that might present a danger not only to the archaeological remains, but also to anybody staying in the area if it's not handled properly. So we're now just awaiting the result from the geotechnics. Meanwhile, we've in a new research project is already focusing on Gjellestad, both the ship burial and the surroundings. The initiative came from the Norwegian Institute of Cultural Heritage, and that's the same people who did the GPR service. And both the museum with Christian and Viking County Council with me, we are participating together with other institutions. So this new project concentrates, among other things, on doing GPR in a bigger radius surrounding the Gjellestad field. In the aerial photo to the left, you can see the area already covered. That is shown with yellow cross-hatching. And the areas lined with red were investigated only last week. So far, the GPR has given us very varying results. It is clear that there is not interesting archaeology to be found everywhere, as mine might believe, because many of the surveyed areas seem pretty empty. But just northeast of the Gjellestad field, new discoveries have been made. I suppose you can see the ship burial in the left corner down below. If you follow there are some red, almost circular dots here. These are burial mounds that are still visible today. If you look at the field northeast of the modern building here, there are more circular shapes, and these are all flattened graves like the ones we have in the Gjellestad field. So it seems like this is one big burial site stretching from the Gjellestad field around the modern houses of today and into the next field. And then if we go further northeast, we have a big long house. It's 60 meters long and around 15 meters wide, which is quite big in, as far as now, among the largest houses we know in Norway. Also further to the northeast is a settlement area where you can see several houses identified here. And also other structures, cooking pits and things we don't really know what is yet. Maybe this is the area where the people living at the Gjellestad field once moved their farm to after abandoning Gjellestad. Our plan this year is to do some small test excavations to have to find datable structures. Among others, we find that in the longhouse, it's probably a big fireplace and should be very well suited for a dating sample. And we hope to get other well-suited samples as well. And moving in the other direction to the southwest of the Gjellestad field and to the other side of the highway, the results are very different. Two houses can be identified by their post holes. That's here, just by the highway. And there are also a few other structures that are visible, but they're hard to get a grip on. And this was somehow disappointing because we had hoped to find traces of a prehistoric trading place here. That was not just something we fantasized about, but it has its roots in that people with metal detectors have made many discoveries of coins and weights and other items typically connected with trade in this area. But the GPR is not really helping us there. So talking of metal detecting, that is also included in our project. Last year, we arranged a survey within the red and blue areas of the map. Within the red area is the big longhouse, if you can see it. And within the blue area is the part of the same burial site as we have in the Gjellestad field. But also here, the results are a bit disappointing. We didn't really find anything at all. That is, only items we consider modern, nothing to give us more knowledge about the Iron Age or Viking Age. This year, we will try to return to the areas marked with purple and orange. As I said, these have been surveyed by people with metal detectors before and giving very interesting results. Just a few examples there. But this time we want to arrange the search ourselves and making sure that we search with the same intensity throughout the areas. The ones who actually do the metal detecting, they're all volunteers, and many of them spend a lot of time on this hobby and contributes to a lot of our general knowledge and also in this specific research project. Before we're finished, I would like to promote the Gjellestad story again. I know Joachim already mentioned it, but this is a website that was released in 2020 after the discovery of the ship burial and after our joint verification project, but before the big excavation was carried out. And Joachim was the project leader, and we were many who contributed. And on this webpage, you can explore the different parts of the Gjellestad field and learn more about what we know and what we think of the archaeology at the site. We have also updated the website with the most important information from the excavation, and the plan is to just keep it going relevant in the years to come. So I hope you'll check it out one day. And with that, I want to say thank you.
Thank you, Sigrid. There we have some questions that has coming in, so I'll take them in order, and maybe some of them has been answered by the presentation, but we'll see. The first one is from Gail Ravenscroft. He asks, "This is so reminiscent of Sutton Hoo. How do these relate to each other, if at all?" And you can decide yourself who wants to answer.
I think Christian wants to answer.
Well, at least I can try. And it is reminiscent, of course it is. Even though there are some great differences as well. when looking at the ship itself, the Sutton Hoo is in more or less the first of finding of this tradition of ship burials. It's from the 600s, so it's quite a few years before the Gjellestad ship. But then again, it's from an Anglo-Saxon cemetery with several mounds in the same manner, organized in the very same way as they did on the Gjellestad. And it's this tradition with burials within with ship burials. It's a long tradition. It even goes back before the Sutton Hoo in a way, if we include boat burials. And in Norway, I think there are as many as at least 600 small boat burials, but only something like on world basis, I think we're touching somewhere around 15 in total of these grand ship burials in monumental mounds. I hope that was an answer.
Thank you. Then we have a question concerning the archaeological process and the precautions. What kind of precautions did you have to take in order to excavate in wintertime? It's from Colin.
Yeah, that would be for me again, I think. Yeah, many precautions. Excavating in Norway during winter is extremely difficult because frost is coming, of course, and all of 2020 went well. We finished 5 days before Christmas, I think, and you saw the photo with the whole ship revealed. But then we decided we had to find another method of how to extract the rivets, and that had to wait until the frost was over. So we had heat installed in the tent actually, and everything was covered with insulation mats. So that was one way of protecting it. So we had to also come down there once a week and actually moisturize the ship remains, because heating inside the tent would dry everything out. So it was quite difficult. And after a while came the mice. And I think we killed 150 of those poor little things, but they were actually they were digging into the ship, so we had to remove them.
Thank you. And then we have 3 questions from an anonymous attendee, and the person wants to know the peak years of the Viking era. That's question 1, and then how many people would fit in the Gjellestad ship, and if the ship was mainly used in Norwegian waters.
Yeah, do you wanna join in on answering, Sigrid? Or...
I know the answer to the first question. Traditionally, it says that the Viking Age kind of starts with a bang in 793 AD with the attack on Lindisfarne, but of course it's not that simple. But we usually say in Norway that we have the Viking Age from around year 800 AD until 1030 or maybe 1050, depending on who you ask. But so those 2 centuries between 800 and 1000 would be, I would say that was the peak Viking area. If you want to say something else, Christian, feel free.
I know, it's fine.
But then the other 2 is better that you answer, I think.
Yeah, can you repeat them just quickly?
Yeah, it's how many people would fit in the Gjellestad ship, do you think? And given its size, kind of how far did it go? Only Norwegian waters or even farther?
Yeah. The last one is extremely difficult to answer because I have no clue actually. We know that they were constructed in a way that they could travel very far. You could sail them across the sea to Great Britain. You could go down to Europe. You could go down the rivers of Russia and Ukraine and come all the way down to Constantinople, as we know they did from written sources. But if the Gjellestad ship itself sailed that long, there's really no way of telling. It's so deteriorated, and we can't even know that with the Oseberg and the Gjellestad ships. So really a tricky question there. Now, when it comes to how many people would fit in the ship, that's more possible to answer. It's 19. I didn't actually say the numbers. I think it's 19.5 meters long, what remains of it. Then we should probably add the 1 or 2 meters because the sterns were plowed away, and that makes room for quite a few people. When rowing such a ship, you would place one rower on each side, and they would be about 1 meter apart, meaning that you could at least fit 40 people in there, maybe even more if you place 2 and 2 together.
Thank you. Then it's a question from Colin again. When was the ship built? When was it buried? And when was it broken into? And I think you mentioned this, but maybe not all the dates in the presentation.
I think I touched upon all of them, but it's always good to repeat, isn't it? The ship, when the ship was built, it's there must be a margin when I come up with a date. We know it must be after 732. We should add some years because the outer annual rings have been removed, and when trying to do a annual ring study, you have to kind of know the outer rings to conclude. So we need more pieces of timber to narrow our date frame. So my best guess is that it's built somewhere around 780 and 830, somewhere in that time frame. And no, that was when it was buried. It must have been built a few years before that, of course, but it wouldn't necessarily have sailed for many years. The Oseberg ship, it was built for the burial, actually. It wouldn't have sailed much at all. While the Gjellestad ship, it's a much more sturdy ship that we think have been out on the open seas for quite a few years before it ended up in the burial. Yeah.
Thank you. Did you mention when it was broken into?
No. I forgot. Sorry. The break-in, I think there are 2 disturbances of the Gjellestad ship. The first one, I think, must have been somewhere in the Viking Age, and not many years after the mound was actually built. We can see that the break-in was coming in from the west, outside the ship, which means the mound was still there when the break-in took place. And we know that the Oseberg and the Gjellestad ships, they were broken into around 950. It's been associated with Harald Bluetooth of Denmark plundering the Oslofjord area in the late 900s. And we could always speculate that the same thing happened with Gjellestad. There was a second disturbance, and that can be dated more precisely. We know from sources from the farm that the mound on top of the ship was removed around 1880, and supposedly they found parts of a boat back then. This means that this ship burial must have been much better preserved back then, and of course it's lost its protective mound, and that was perhaps the most gravest of the disturbances.
Thank you. Then we have a different topic here. The question is again from Gail Ravenscroft. The ancient skull fragment mentions a suture. Can you explain?
Yeah, I can. If you don't want to do it, Sigrid.
I didn't get the question.
It was that the text for the skull fragment, it mentions that it has a suture.
That's the seams that are in between all the parts of a skull, isn't it? Like that's why a baby has soft spots, because the skull is expanding and it's like a seam where the different parts of the skull meet. And you found a bit of skull with that piece of seam visible.
And that is kind of important, because when you find this kind of suture, you can identify age of the deceased.
Then the natural follow-up question is, what was the age of the deceased?
Yeah, I can't remember, because and it's not important when we talk about the ship burial, because it is a much older find.
Thank you. Then it's Colin again, and it's two questions. The first one is, was the axe in the ship or under the ship? And then to the mast question, kind of what future analysis can you do to learn more about the mast question? And what kind of evidence will you look for?
Yeah. I'll take the axe question first then. There was in fact two axes, one inside and one under, so both are correct actually. The axe inside was removed, we could only see the imprint of it, while the axe underneath the ship, it was still there intact. So this is a piece of or a finding that we are analyzing right now. We are running CT scans of it, and our conservator is working on it, so we're and excavating it slowly, so we can see more details on that in a few weeks. But that's what I can tell you now. The mast question, that's the big question. I can't say anything about the mast itself, but we can speculate in the sailing or rowing abilities of the ship, and that's why it's so important that we do the CT scanning so meticulously and adding everything into that giant model that I showed you, because in the end, when everything is in place, a ship reconstructor will help us and trying to reconstruct the shape of the ship, its abilities. Could it actually be used for sailing, or is it most likely that it was for rowing? We wanna add all data into that model before we jump to conclusions. So that's the future prospect for that.
Thank you. I think we have two kind of interesting questions that kind of fit well together. The first one is from Colin, and I think this is for Sigrid. How does the farmer feel about the new ship mound? And the second one is from Marty Josund. Can we visit the site? Because we'll be traveling in the area next week.
I can answer both those. To the last one, yes, you can visit the site, but there's nothing much to see of the archaeology, because as I showed the picture, that we have just covered the ship imprint with a little mound, and it's not possible to see it. But you can go up on top of the yellow mound, and there are signs there to give information on the site, and you can come any time of the day. Actually, there's a little parking lot. And when it comes to the farmer, I think we have a very good relationship with him, and that he is quite interested. And Christian didn't say so, but on this photo of all the proud archaeologists lifting up the keel, the farmer was on the far right in the picture. So he is paying attention and is interested. And we have made an agreement with him that for 5 years now, we have been paying for him not to use the field. So he's not losing any money from this, and he is patiently awaiting, I think, what is going to happen in the future. And he's also part of a work group where Christian also is, that works on how, if to and if so, how to develop their area. You were there too, Joachim. So I think he's quite involved in what is going on, and that he is interested, and that's my impression. Absolutely.
Thank you. Now I see you, Gillian. Does it mean that we are running out of time?
Yes, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. We are at 10 minutes past time. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm sorry we didn't get to all questions, but thank you everyone who sent questions in. This has been so awesome to listen to. I know I learned a lot today. So thank you to our attendees for being here and engaging with us. Thank you, Joachim, Sigrid, and Christian, for your time today, and also your efforts with the ship bureau, and for being here, for teaching us. This has been so interesting. I know we all learned a lot. Today's session was recorded, so this will be emailed out in an email. You will see it from me coming out in probably around a week, and it'll also be posted publicly on our YouTube channel, so you can see it there as well. But I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.